So thank you, Senator, for your support and for your service to the citizens of District 10. I'm going to start just by telling y'all a little bit about myself. Then I'm going to tell you why I'm running for Attorney General, and then I'm going to open it up for questions. So we're going to save a whole lot of time for questions for y'all tonight. Let me give you a little bit about my background. I was born in Columbia, but Greenwood is my hometown. I've lived there since I was 10 years old. Went off to college in Georgia, went to Toccoa Falls College over in Northeast Georgia, played basketball and baseball there. In fact, as a young man growing up, that's about all I did was play sports. That was we didn't have all these distractions that the kids have now with smartphones and all the media, and I'm thankful for that. When we got bored, we tried to find a gym somewhere, get a pickup game of basketball or football out in the yard, and really enjoyed my childhood and my college years over in Toccoa, Georgia. After school, I moved back to Greenwood. My brother and I started a small business. It was a sign company called Grace Signs over in Greenwood. Running a small business was one of the hardest things I've ever done in my life, but also one of the most rewarding things. You really learn when you run a small business how to do a whole lot of things, but balancing the budget, my brother and I had to do that. We learned how to put up signs of all sorts, learned how to wire up lighted signs, learned how to weld steel pipes together. So there's a lot of skills that I learned as a young guy coming out of college, trying to run a small business that I think helped me today. As you talk about a prosecutor, I go in front of juries all the time to try to protect our families, prosecute bad guys. And when I'm speaking to juries, it's a lot of small business owners, it's farmers, it's teachers, it's regular folks. And so being in a small business early in my career, before I went to law school and went into this field that I'm in now as a prosecuting attorney, was invaluable for me. My wife and I were married while I was in that small business in Greenwood. She grew up on a little farm in Mountville, South Carolina. I don't know if y'all know where Mountville is. It's up in Lawrence County. She grew up on a dairy farm up there. Her folks, Neil and Ann Crisp, they're still farmers today in Mountville, and I'm proud to be their in-laws. Great folks. Vanessa and I were married 26 years ago. We have had 4 children. In that 26 years, the oldest of which is now married himself and doing adult things in Greenville, works for BMW, their BMW facility in Greer. Is married, his wife Hannah, they live up in Fountain Inn. And my 3 daughters are in Greenwood with me. My oldest daughter went to North Greenville for college for a couple of years, played volleyball, came back home. She's in nursing school now, working itself and getting through the nursing program. And I have 2 daughters that are in high school. But love my family. It's a nice, I know y'all got one of these cards. That's a nice picture of our family on the back of these home cards. But I'm very proud of them. And family is what it's all about. It's why I decided to go into this field in the first place. When I went to law school, that was my goal when I went to law school. I decided I'm going to try to get into law school. I only applied to one. At the time, that's only one we had in South Carolina was USC Law School in Columbia. There wasn't another law school. And so I wanted to practice in South Carolina. I wanted to work with law enforcement and be a criminal prosecutor. Knew that from the time I went to law school. I was able to get a job at the Attorney General's office. Early on in law school, I worked there in several divisions in the Attorney General's office with some people that are still there. Helped write opinions, legal opinions for Bob Cook. Was able, when I was in law school, to work on some First Amendment freedom of expression cases. We had a case out of Great Falls, so it was up in your neck of the woods, where a Wiccan priestess sued the town of Great Falls because they had somebody pray before the meeting, the town council meeting, and they prayed in Jesus' name. And she was so offended that she sued the town of Great Falls, and I was able to work on that religious liberty case there when I was in law school. But when I got through law school, took the bar and passed, the Attorney General's office hired me. The first one I worked for was Charlie Condon, and I worked for Henry McMaster before he ran for governor. Many of you know he was the Attorney General of our state. My first job as a prosecuting attorney there after I finished law school was prosecuting sexually violent predator cases. And then I went to the Internet Crimes Against Children Task Force, and I was the first prosecutor in our state's history to try some of these internet predator cases. I don't know if y'all remember, about 20 years ago, NBC had this show called Catch a Predator, and they'd have these guys posing as young girls in these Yahoo chat rooms. That's what it was back then. It was before Facebook and social media. And they would get these guys that were thinking they were coming to meet a young girl to have sex, and they would show up, and there would be a police officer with some mean guys with badges and guns waiting on them. And I was able to prosecute some of those cases early on in the Attorney General's office. First one we did was in Lexington. Second one we did was up in Walhalla in Oconee County. We got convictions on both of those and max sentences. This was very early in my career. They were very tough cases and sobering cases because we were dealing with hard subject matter. Also in the Internet Crimes Against Children Task Force, I was having to work with SLED. I was working in the Computer Crimes Unit with SLED agents, so we're having to look at these child sex abuse images. And I can tell you some of the hardest work I've ever done, having to watch these images and videos of young children being sexually abused. It really does something to you. A little part of you dies when you have to watch that stuff. But it was rewarding work. We were able to get a lot of predators off the streets in that role. Had that first case in Lexington. Was able to meet Rick Hubbard, who's now your solicitor here in Saluda. And Donnie Myers at the time was the solicitor, the elected solicitor for the 11th Circuit. They saw me try that case as a young guy. Not long after that, I did some other work there at the AG's office, but less than within about a year and a half of me trying that case in Lexington, they offered me a job to come work in the 11th Circuit. And so I was an assistant solicitor in the 11th Judicial Circuit. Most of my caseload was down in Lexington. I did come up to Saluda, the beautiful courthouse we have here in downtown Saluda, for a couple of cases, but mostly I was working in the Lexington office. Prosecuted everything from murders to child sex abuse, to drug trafficking, to property crimes, to felony driving under the influence with death cases. You name it, I had that in my caseload in Lexington. It was one of the best experiences I'd ever had. I worked for about 4 years for Solicitor Myers. At the time, it was Deputy Solicitor Rick Hubbard, who's now your elected solicitor and one of my colleagues. Rick was my direct supervisor, so I learned a lot from Rick at the time as well. Working with law enforcement and crime victims, which is something that I believe that kind of the Lord built me for. Arguing cases in a courtroom to a jury, that's what I love to do. I don't feel any more at home than when I'm standing in front of a jury asking them for justice on a case where somebody's been hurt and somebody's been victimized by a crime. And so that was really where I got in my wheelhouse, was working for Donnie in Lexington. He's still a great friend of mine today. I saw Donnie a few weeks ago at the Solicitors Conference. He and Paula came down. It was great to see him. And learned a lot from him. Alan was elected Attorney General, Alan Wilson. Alan and I tried some cases together in the Attorney General's office before. So we were able to become friends over prosecuting. One main one that Alan still talks a lot about today, we prosecuted a guy up in Spartanburg that was a retired city police officer that had molested his granddaughter over the course of about 4 years. We were able to get a conviction on that case. Alan and I forged a friendship during that time. But ultimately, when he was elected Attorney General, he called me and he asked me if I would come work in the AG's office under him and help run the statewide grand jury. So I left Lexington, the solicitor's office, went to work for Alan. I thought I would be there in the Attorney General's office for a little bit at that point. But you know, as I like to say a lot of times, you've heard this many times, man makes his plans and the Lord laughs. He had other plans for me. Having been from Greenwood at the time, my younger brother was working at Greenwood County Sheriff's Department. And I handled a conflict case in Greenwood. It was a theft case. It was a deputy up there that had been stealing people blind, heavy equipment, that sort of thing. He was writing reports on, I know Billy probably remembers this case, he was actually writing the police reports on heavy equipment that he was stealing. It was unbelievable. So the Greenwood folks had to conflict the case at the Attorney General's office, so I handled it. The guy's name is Scott Masterson. He ended up getting some prison time. And the Greenwood Sheriff's Office took notice of that because they just, they called me, a couple of guys there, and they said, look, we don't hardly ever see people get prison time up here these days because the solicitor's office is giving cases away. They're not trying a lot of cases. The defense attorneys are kind of running all over them. And there was a lot of demoralized sheriff's deputies and police officers in Greenwood at the time. So they asked me if I would consider moving back to Greenwood, moving home, moving my wife, and at that time we had just had our fourth child, Annie, who is 16 years old now, and in high school. And Vanessa and I prayed about it, and I knew that when she said, I think this is what God wants you to do. She is, Vanessa, if y'all know, I hope you get to meet her soon. My wife's probably one of the least risky people in the world. She's very risk averse. And it was a big risk for us to leave the Attorney General's office, which was a good job at the time. I was doing what I felt like I'd be doing for a while, move home to the unknown of running for solicitor and against an incumbent solicitor at that, which I think I was maybe just too young and dumb at the time to realize how hard it is to beat an incumbent sheriff or solicitor in an election. But one of the reasons we were able to win that election, we ultimately did move home to Greenwood. I had to leave the Attorney General's office. I ended up getting a job in Greenwood with John McCravey, who's a good friend of the Senators and mine, has a law firm in Greenwood. They hired me for that year. I was running for for solicitor, circuit solicitor at the time. So I could put food on the table for my family, work with him several days a week. Then I'd usually go campaign towards the end of the week, and that's kind of the way that job worked. But the reason I got elected and we were able to beat an incumbent solicitor in those 4 counties is law enforcement was ready for a change. They knew my background and they knew how aggressive I was as a trial prosecutor going into court and getting results. And they fought for me. And we were able to win that race back in 2012, 13 years ago. When I was elected solicitor, I took office in January of 2013, and I've been the elected solicitor just north here, up here in Greenwood, and I guess east of here in Newberry. It's one of my counties as well, but Newberry, Greenwood, Lawrence, and Abbeville are 4 counties of the 8th Circuit, and prosecuting everything under the sun in those years. We've tried. I have a pending death penalty case right now. It's my 4th capital case where we've sought the death penalty in our circuit. As Senator Garrett knows, those are very, very, very difficult cases. And disappointingly, I think our courts across the country have really started to almost litigate the death penalty out. And they've made it so difficult where it takes forever to get these cases through court now. But despite the hurdles that we've had in death penalty cases, we have sought it four times in my circuit over the last 13 years. We currently have one pending in our circuit now. Again, we've done a little bit of everything in our circuit. One thing I'm real proud of is seeing young attorneys that we hired kind of come up and become great courtroom prosecutors. One of the ones in our circuit is now the 10th Circuit elected solicitor in Anderson and Oconee. Micah Black was just elected back in November in those 2 counties, the 10th Circuit. He started, his first job as a lawyer was in my office, came up through the ranks in our office. The last few years he was with us. He was running our docket in Abbeville, and we're real proud of Micah. It's kind of bittersweet. We didn't want to see him go, but we're proud to see that him gone to Anderson. The reason he got elected was because he had both sheriffs' endorsement. And that's because of the reputation we have in the 8th Circuit. That helped Micah get elected. He grew up in Anderson, so he had some roots there, but he had law enforcement behind him as well. So that's a little bit about my background and where I've come to today. I was just elected in November, re-elected to my 4th term as the 8th Circuit Solicitor. We have not been opposed since we won that first race, and I think that speaks to the great work that people in my office are continuing to do. It speaks to our relationship with our law enforcement agencies, our sheriffs, our police chiefs. That is why I was recruited to run. And so I believe I know the good relationship we have with law enforcement is the main reason I haven't had an opponent. Because anybody who's even thought about running against us knows how strongly law enforcement supports us in the 8th Circuit. So, very proud of that. But in my 13th year as 8th Circuit Solicitor, have built great relationships all over the state. 2 stints I did in the Attorney General's office. We were able to build great relationships with SLED, agents statewide, DNR, Highway Patrol. I have really good relationships in all of our law enforcement agencies across South Carolina. And I believe that we will be the law enforcement supported candidate in this race. In fact, your Saluda County Sheriff Josh Price is a good friend. I've known him for some time. We've worked together on a couple of initiatives we're trying to get through the legislature, one of which is judicial reform. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. The way we elect judges in South Carolina has always been a problem. And so we need to change the way we elect judges in South Carolina. So that's an issue Sheriff Price and I have worked together on, among other issues. But I'm proud to have his endorsement in Edgefield, Jody Rowland, McCormick, Chad Cox, Greenwood, Hattieville. We have a lot of sheriff's endorsements already in this race, and I'm very proud of that. So why am I running for Attorney General? Let me go over a couple of things here, then I'm going to open it up for questions. First and foremost, I believe if you're going to have a prosecuting or a chief prosecutor in South Carolina, which is what the Constitution says the Attorney General is. The Constitution says the Attorney General should be the chief prosecuting officer for the state. And so the buck stops at the Attorney General for prosecution and to be a leader for the criminal justice system in South Carolina. You have to have a respected courtroom prosecutor who's been doing this a long time if you're going to elect an Attorney General in the state. Been doing this over 2 decades at this point. I love what I do, and I would love to take what we've been doing in the 8th Circuit for the past 13 years and take that mindset, that aggressive mindset, to fight crime to the statewide level. So first and foremost, you need experience, courtroom prosecutor. Secondly, and I've checked that box certainly in this race, having done this for over 2 decades. Secondly, though, we need someone who is a lifelong conservative Republican. And to me, that's very important. And one of the things Amy mentioned earlier, and I'm glad she brought this up, is the attorneys general across the country, the Republican conservative attorney generals, have been able to get together and work together to fight bad policy coming out of Washington, D.C., fight federal overreach, and to defend and write amicus briefs, work together to make sure that we're promoting conservative policies nationwide. But particularly here in South Carolina, making sure that Washington, D.C., and look, during the Obama years, during the Biden years, we saw an extreme attempt to overreach into South Carolina and tell us in South Carolina how to run our state. And you need a conservative attorney general that you know has been with the Republican Party and believed in the Republican platform and in conservative values that our state holds dear. Those are the same things that we're going to be fighting in the courtroom when those laws that we pass in South Carolina get challenged, right? So we passed the heartbeat bill a couple of years ago. In fact, we've had to pass it twice. The first time, our Supreme Court overturned it. Thankfully, the second time, when it was passed by the General Assembly, the Supreme Court upheld it the second time. So we have a heartbeat bill that was fought for a ton by this senator over here. This man here was the deciding vote in the Senate the first time it was passed, and Representative McCravey and other conservatives in the General Assembly were able to get the heartbeat bill passed. Well, when we pass conservative pro-life legislation like the heartbeat bill, who defends that when it is challenged by Planned Parenthood and all the pro-abortion groups, radical pro-abortion groups? It's the Attorney General. The Attorney General has to stand up in court and fight to defend good laws that we pass here in South Carolina. And so I can tell you, as your next Attorney General, I will be fighting like crazy to uphold the laws that our General Assembly passes that are conservative bills. We have to do that in the courtroom. Election integrity is a huge deal. After 2020, I think we realized that. 2020, we saw all kinds of problems with the election. The COVID pandemic was a problem. We ended up with a election that a lot of people didn't trust the results of. And a lot of that was because of mail-in ballots and lack of voter ID in a lot of these swing states. We have to make sure in South Carolina that we're fighting for election integrity, making sure that our voter ID laws aren't challenged. Democrats have been challenging our voter ID laws for years. And we need to make sure that you have someone who's been a Republican, who has stood strong on election integrity and voter ID, because those battles will continue to be fought in our courtrooms in future elections. I can assure you of that. Medical freedom. We saw Democrats and some Republicans join in with this, but the assault on our freedoms to make medical choices for ourselves. We saw vaccine mandates on a vaccine that we now know has some problems. We had mask mandates. People were forced to wear masks, and you still see people wearing masks around. And medically, we know now from a lot of these studies that it didn't do anything to stop the virus. So we need to make sure in South Carolina that we don't fall into this trap ever again of not letting our citizens make medical choices for themselves. Particularly parents with their children should have the right to make medical decisions for their children based on what they believe after doing research is the best decision for them and their families. Parents making choices for their children's education. Those are things that we're going to have to continue to fight in the courtroom, because every time there's an education bill passed, where there's parental choice bills passed, there's challenges by the teachers' unions and by a lot of the left-wing groups that want to take those choices away from parents to educate their children. So we need to make sure we have an Attorney General that believes in parental choice for education, that believes in medical choice, and all these other issues. The Second Amendment has to be upheld time and time again. The Second Amendment says that the right to bear arms shall not be infringed. Shall not be infringed. That's pretty plain to me. And we need to make sure that we don't have gun control laws that come in and take away your freedom and your right to bear arms. Because ultimately, the First Amendment freedoms that you have, freedom of speech, freedom to freely exercise your religion, go to the church you want to go to and worship God the way you want to. The only way you guarantee those rights are how? With the Second Amendment. And making sure that the Second Amendment, that citizens, law-abiding citizens are able to bear arms, protect their families, and protect their freedoms. I could go on and on about a lot of other conservative policies, but I can tell you that I have been a conservative and a Republican. I grew up in a family that took me to Republican Party meetings, probably as a little kid, even when I didn't want to go. I went to a number of pro-life rallies as a child, and that was really ingrained in me from my mother, who was strongly pro-life. I remember praying with our family and a whole lot of other people on the steps of the U.S. Supreme Court for Roe v. Wade to be overturned. And we did that, I remember doing that on 2 separate occasions. Once, I believe I was around 10. The second time was I was in college. I went with my dad, and we drove up, and we were part of the pro-life march in January that they did every year. And I'm glad to see that, thank God, that the Supreme Court finally overturned Roe v. Wade and gave the states the ability to pass laws like the heartbeat. And so that is part of who I am, it's part of my DNA. As a lifelong conservative Republican, you know where I'm going to stand on the issues as your next Attorney General when we have these battles in the courtroom. So, experienced prosecutor for over 2 decades, first and foremost, and then secondly, I've been a lifelong conservative Republican. And that's who we need in our next Attorney General. I'm the only candidate in this race that checks both of those boxes to be your next AG. I believe that we have a really good chance of winning this race. We have a good path to victory. We've had a lot of momentum so far. I'm thankful for all the support we've seen in different places around South Carolina. Thank you, Amy, mentioning that it is very hard on your family and on you individually to run for a statewide office. I'm not sure I even realized how difficult that was. I've run in 4 counties before. And that's one thing. You're home every night. 4 counties, I was never more than about an hour and a half from home, even at the furthest point in my circuit, in the 8th Circuit. Statewide's a little bit different when you have to go down to Myrtle Beach for a couple of days, or Beaufort, or Charleston. Takes you away from home. So, but I do believe that we have a very strong campaign that we're building here. Certainly raising money is a big part of that. Raising grassroots support. We have a very strong campaign apparatus. On these cards, my website is on here. So any other question you have about votestumbo.com, we kept it pretty simple. So that the name of the website's right underneath my family, a picture of my family on the back of the card here. I would love for y'all to go to the website, check it out, and see a little bit more about our campaign. Also, we have a Facebook page, David Stumbo. My personal page is David M. Stumbo, but if you go to David Stumbo, that's our campaign Facebook page, and I'd love for you to be able to go there and see a little bit more about our campaign as well. So, I didn't keep the time, Amy. I hope I didn't go over on
no,
that.
that's good.
I wanted to leave plenty of time for questions, though. So, I'd like to open the floor for some questions if y'all have any. So.
Yeah, I got one.
Yes, sir.
A couple, actually. But
Yep.
how do you feel, as you being a prosecutor and everything, on plea deals? How do you feel about those?
I mean, the reality is there's going to be times where we have to make plea offers in cases. It's the sheer volume. If you look at the volume of cases, for example, last year in our circuit, and this is not unlike a lot of the other circuits in the state, we had between 8,000 and 9,000 cases come in the door for 4 counties that our office had to handle. So, and of those, almost 9,000 cases, I have 17 prosecutors across 4 counties, and we're one of the lower staffed solicitors' offices in the state. We just don't get a lot of county funding in my circuit. So we have less prosecutors. So my prosecutors average usually on their case docket between 500 to 600 warrants at any given time. So
were they given more or less?
So more cases than the rest of the state.
Were they given more plea deals away or less?
Well, no, I think what you have to do is make sure you find repeat offenders, the worst of the worst, the really bad guys that are committing crimes and are dangerous. We got to take them first and foremost off the board.
Because that's what you see on the news all the time.
Right.
These people that kill people. Oh yeah, you get slapped on the wrist and all.
Yeah.
Oh, I got a plea deal.
I'll tell you one of the 2 things we need to address that, and I meant to bring this up in my policy part, but I'm glad you asked the
I
question.
brought it up for you.
Yes, thank you. We need judicial reform. We need accountability with our judges, because a lot of times as prosecutors, we go and we do a straight up plea. We may say they have 5 charges. Sometimes the plea offer is, will you plead to these main charges? Sometimes the others are collateral charges. That's the deal. But you have this sentencing range that you're going to face up to so many years in prison, and the judge gives the sentence. That's what happens in a lot of our cases. The bottom line, though, is if you don't have judges that have accountability back to the people, that's a problem. And that's the way we've always done it in South Carolina, is the legislature elects your judges 100%. They have the authority. There's no executive branch involvement at all. Now, there was a judicial reform bill passed a couple years ago that gives the governor 4 votes on the Judicial Merit Screening Commission. I don't think that's enough. That's not nearly far enough on what we need to do with judicial reform. I'm an advocate for doing a federal model. We hear this in presidential elections all the time. Elections have consequences. Because you know the president's going to be appointing all the federal judges, all the way up from the circuit court, the district court, all the way up to the Supreme Court. And so the president has the prerogative to appoint judges. Well, I think it needs to be that way in South Carolina. I would advocate for a bill to be passed with a Judicial Merit Screening Commission, which is currently under the legislature, to be under the governor. And it basically screens out people that make sure they're qualified, that they've done a requisite amount and know the law. You want to make sure you have judges that know the law. But once they get past that commission, I think it needs to go to the governor, and the governor should select an appointee. And then the governor's accountable for who he picks, ultimately. And I think right now the problem is, if you end up with a bad judge, who do you complain to? Really, and even Billy, I think, would say this, really he's one vote out of 185 because it's Senate and House. So really the House of Representatives even has an outsized influence because there's a lot more of them than senators. So the way we have done it for a long time, I think is just systemically is a bad way of doing it. And so I think if we change the way we elect judges, we'll have more accountability when those judges render a sentence and pass a sentence down. The second thing we really need, and I've been advocating for this for years, is truth in sentencing. We have had, since 1996, there was a truth in sentencing bill passed in our state, but it only applied to the big crimes. So murder is day for day in South Carolina. A lot of other big crimes, rape, armed robbery, some higher level drug traffickings, the big drug trafficking cases that are no parole, they have to do 85% of their sentence. So when those guys are sentenced, everybody knows the day they're getting out. And it's way off in the future because there's no parole. The way that most sentences are done in South Carolina is actually, I still don't even know, as a prosecutor, I've been doing this over 20 years, how long they're actually going to serve in prison. And so that's another problem. A lot of these recent cases we've seen where you've had a repeat property crimes offender, that's the guy that killed the girl in Columbia, Logan Federico. He had a history of a lot of burglaries and drug offenses. He was a crackhead, going around stealing stuff so he could support his crack habit. Never had a violent offense on his record, but the bottom line is he had done it a bunch of times. And every time he gets sentenced to 5 years and only do a year.
Yeah.
And somehow, I don't know how that keeps happening. I think that's why we need truth in sentencing, to make sure when an offender is sentenced, that they actually do the time they're sentenced to. And the victim of the crime doesn't see him walking around on the streets in a third of the time or a quarter of the time. We really have to be more honest in court on what the time they're getting and how much they're actually serving. And I've taught some of the prison attorneys that work for the Department of Corrections and tried to figure that formula out, and I'm still confused by it. And I do this for a living, so that's a problem. So we need to get to a point where I think we restructure our criminal statutes and really have sentencing that matters. And so everybody in the courtroom knows this is what that means. And even if they're let off on some good time credits, it's not doing a third of the time. I mean, that's crazy. That shouldn't be that way. So those are two things that I think would help significantly in these repeat offenders that we keep seeing come in and out of the prison system. They need to be doing more time, especially the ones that are repeat offenders. Look, we have programs in our office for a lot of drug addicts that end up one time, or maybe they have a couple of offenses where they're caught with drugs and they're just an addict, and they can get better. Sometimes they can, and we've seen a lot of success stories with our drug court programs. But if you have somebody who's just repeatedly committing the same crimes, even if there's somebody like this guy that killed Logan Federico, I don't think anybody would have predicted he was going to end up killing. But when you break in enough houses, sooner or later there's going to be a violent confrontation, and somebody is going to be bad.
You don't know,
and that's what happened. Right. And so I think we really have to take those things more seriously. That's something Billy and I talked about a number of times because we practice in the criminal justice arena and we see that stuff happening. So I think those are two big issues that we can fix And I will advocate for those. Ultimately, both of those things have to be done through the legislature. But as the Attorney General, I'm gonna have a bully pulpit to advocate for those issues. So we'll continue to do that. Yes, sir.
Thank you. You went over so many things. I mean, it was just,
Yes, sir.
just so much. And,
Yes.
you know, one thing I've helped write some of the plans for drug addicts, how not to get recidivism. And I happen to be very pro-jail.
Yeah.
Walked in many maximum security places, and definitely jail's good for drug addicts. It really is.
Yeah.
So it's an experience. So anyways, but that's not what I wanted to ask you about.
Yes.
Brandon Newton, up in Lancaster, he's our house whip.
Okay.
And he canceled 5 of our precincts, which had to be signed off by McMaster, went to the Senate and everything. But with that, on a Republican note, our chair did not reorg. They combined 10 into 5, did not reorg the other 5, so we ended up losing 10 ECs. That's on a Republican side. We lost 10 executive committee people. But the part that has to do with you, that's a Republican thing. The part that has to do with you is, my question is, there's a law on the books that says you can only have 1,500 voters per precinct. The law's been there since '62. It was redone in '87 from what I understand. I don't know if it was redone since, but it's still 1,500. Only 40% of the precincts in South Carolina are within the 1,500, including the 10% override. You're allowed to have 1,650. 40% are not following that. We have probably 5 precincts over 4,000. We got a couple over 5,000. And it's technically against the law. And it is the House Whip that did this. He's the one that initiated it. And on a side note, he's also in charge of the voter register. He's the chairman of the voter register committee, which just kind of stinks of impropriety. Not saying he did anything illegal. It really doesn't look good. And our optics, South Carolina is all over Fox News every day for our court system. Every day they're talking about how Columbia is corrupt and just the looks of it. But when it comes to the 1,500, what can you actually do as far as to keep us following the law on the voter laws? Because he plans on doing it in other places, of just taking out under the idea of saving money from voter machines, while Trump, I guess he's not watching the news, is talking about same-day voting, hand counting. So what can be done, because you want to be the top prosecutor, and you see where I'm going?
Well, I think one of the first things that we can do is do an Attorney General's opinion. That process is basically the chairman of the Republican Party, or any, I think, person that has an elected position that wants to challenge that and say, look, we're not following the law in Lancaster County on the numbers on our precincts.
In the state, the state's not following.
Right, and so I think ultimately all it has to do would be to come from an elected official or a party, somebody in the party to challenge it. So yes, that's one way of doing it. The Attorney General can weigh in. Now, the Attorney General's opinions don't have the force of law like a court opinion, but it's kind of the next best thing. And so an AG opinion, I think, would be very helpful in that situation, to say, look, these counties are not following the law in regards to the numbers. And again, I think the AG weighs in on it, probably gonna say, well, the plain language of the statute says that it has to be 1,500 or less, and we're not following that. And so that would give some incentive to say, well, if a court weighed in on this, they would find that the legislature, by eliminating the precincts is in violation of the law. So that's how you would have to start that process. But yeah, the Attorney General can weigh in on any of those issues, and it happens quite frequently that the AG will get a request to say, you know, is this law still valid? Is it still enforceable? You know, what does it mean in terms of how you interpret it in any given case or any given county? That would be a good place to start. But then secondly, you know, I think the courts would have to make a decision on it, to invalidate and say it's not following state law, and so it would be vacant, that decision by the General Assembly and the governor that signs off on it, basically to eliminate those precincts. The court weighed in on it. Now, I don't know how the court would ultimately rule, but I mean, ultimately the court has to weigh in on that issue to determine whether the counties are following their, I say the counties, the legislature's making the call, whether the legislature's following the law. And if, you know, again, if they're not, then that's how you can rein that in. The other way is to, certainly, I mean, I think the AG can make an opinion, but ultimately the court would have to say the legislature is violating the law, and that would be enforced. So I think an Attorney General's opinion would be a good idea there. So, has there been a request of Representative Newton to revisit that? I mean, how is
I
it?
spoke to him on the phone, and it started with the question of executive committee men. That's how it started. And what he said, when I asked him about that, I said, we're losing representation. That's how this whole thing started. And I said, you know, without the ECs and we're not having meetings and stuff, we're, you know, how's our Lancaster, our county person supposed to know how we feel? And he said that to know how the voters feel after we have been elected is counterproductive. That's how this started. Okay, that's how the whole thing started. And it was like, ouch, you know. And then, you know, I spoke to him about the 1,500, about saving money for voting machines. I guess they're really expensive. And I mentioned, I said, there's a good chance we may not have them. And he said, no, we're gonna have them. And so on and so forth. He's just, you know, he said that he saved money, and that's it, and that's where he's at.
Well, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense because, you know, our revenues have continued to go up. So you would think that we could dedicate more money to our elections, and our population's going up, right? So if we have less precincts for more people, that's going to continue to be a problem if, you know, number of people per precinct, because, I mean, we've got people moving in South Carolina every day. Hundreds.
Our county has about 10,000 more houses in the last year and a half.
Right.
That's just the northern part, that's Indian land. That's not the
So
whole.
I would think that the best answer, the General Assembly either needs to amend the law to increase the size of the precincts. I mean, that's one legal way they could do that, is say, we have more people in South Carolina now, we don't want to have a ton more precincts, but, you know, have some other limit rather than 1,500, if they chose to do it that way. That is one way to kind of change it, but just to arbitrarily not follow the law and eliminate precincts, that doesn't make much sense. So,
Well, this will happen. But thank you.
yes, but I mean,
I think that was great.
I think as a policy matter, if the General Assembly said, hey, look, we're gonna increase the number in the statute, say, all right, precincts can be 3,000 or less now, or 2,500, but just to account for the growth in population, that may make sense. But I do think that's a problem, to just eliminate precincts. It doesn't feel like the right way to go about the problem, to fix the issue. So thank you for bringing that up.
Thank
I was
you.
not aware of that issue until you brought it up tonight. So
That's why I'm going around the state kind of bringing it up.
yeah. I don't believe we eliminated any precincts I know we have an agreement.
No, we haven't, agreement was But to your point, you as a citizen of one of those 5 that got blocked out or whatever, get one from each of those. You guys can bring your own lawsuit. If your legislator is not doing what they're supposed to, or you feel like they're not doing what they should have got you an attorney general's opinion. Number one, if they're doing what's correct, then they should have attorney general's opinion to explain why they can do it. I'm not sure, but it seems like if they take it through the Senate or they take it through the House, we have home rule, as you understand, and your local people should understand the local makeup better than, say, somebody down in Columbia. So we give a lot of deference to that local legislator who knows a little bit more about the local people and what they want. But that doesn't say that you as an individual citizen, if you're one of those affected people, cannot bring a lawsuit in your county and say, you're doing this wrong, here's the law. We got an attorney general's opinion, for instance, that says what you did was improper. We want to enjoin you from doing what you've done and put us back to 10 as opposed to 5. You have that right as a citizen of the United States, as a citizen of South Carolina, as a citizen of Lancaster. You as an individual have a standing to present your case before court. That's the beauty of America. In a lot of countries, we don't have that right, but we do in America. You sitting right there have as much power as I do to bring a lawsuit if somebody's wronging you in this state. And that includes your government. We can sue our government. There's something called sovereign immunity. It means on certain things we can't get over on, but when it comes to your right to vote, you have an absolute right to bring that action. So, you know, these discussions are excellent. It's good for you to know that. And so if you feel like that's what's going on, then, you know, ask your attorney, Alan Wilson, to give you an opinion on whether or not that's proper or not. And if it wasn't, then you should take your stand. That's what you have that right to do in America, and we should all do that. You know, you should all stand up when something's being done wrong that you know is wrong. Stand up. You know, when they closed our churches down because of this virus, it's an example. Can't close our churches down. You just can't do that. Period. We knew that, and yet we were going to have to, and we did. We had started bringing lawsuits. Our attorney general started bringing lawsuits. We need a Christian attorney general who's not going to let God's people be kept out of their church. I mean, that's kind of like at the top of the list. But when our government starts doing that kind of thing, we have an absolute right to grieve to our court system. Okay?
Churches were closed and some have strict clubs and that sort of thing.
Well, liquor stores, those are essential business.
Doesn't make a whole lot of sense, does it? Yeah.
For some of us, our churches are essential business.
Correct. Other questions?
What are your top 3 to 5 priorities?
First and foremost, as a prosecutor, we've got to keep our families safe. That's number one. So all these issues we talked about, making sure that violent offenders, repeat offenders are go to prison, that's number one. Number two is making sure that we stand for your liberties and your constitutional rights, like we've been talking about. We need to make sure that, and there's a whole lot of your freedom and your Second Amendment rights, your First Amendment rights to freely exercise your religion. Religious liberty should never be infringed on, your ability to exercise. And I'd like to see that on a national level, our courts are starting to, are getting better with that. The Supreme Court, the last few decisions that it made in recent years, have actually given coaches the right to pray with their teams in the middle of the football field after a game. Whereas before, a lot of that stuff was these coaches were being fired, teachers were being fired. And the First Amendment was never meant to limit someone who works in the school from freely exercising their faith. So you're protecting liberties would be number two. And third is making sure that that when we pass good laws in South Carolina, we're protecting the laws that we pass here, and we're protecting our citizens from the overreach of the federal government. So when there's overburdensome regulation on our businesses coming from Washington, that we're fighting on those fronts in the courtroom to strike down those laws that are hurting our businesses and our quality of life in South Carolina. And when we pass good laws on the state level to have those penalties. So fighting the battles in the courtroom on federal overreach and states' rights to me is very, very important. So And I will say as part of that, I'm 100% pro-life. We have to protect the unborn. If we don't protect the lives of babies in the womb, that undermines every other right that we have. If we don't get that right, then we have problems. And so I'm thankful that we're in an era now where we live in a pro-life state. There's still work to be done. We have pro-abortion doctors now sending the abortion pill into our state, and these young girls that are scared, don't know what they're doing, they're taking these things. And not only does it take the life of the baby, it's putting these young girls at risk too. So it's time to go to war with these blue state pro-abortion doctors that are trying to practice law or practice medicine without a license in South Carolina. And I think that's going to be a big priority of mine to cut the head off the snake there. Yep.
Issue of judicial reform, David, you and I have been talking about that for a lot of years. The other option, of course, is to let the public choose their judges. In other words, have popular elections. In 48 states, that's what they do. And so that's always another option, is to allow the people to select their judges. A lot of people don't want to do that because they don't want to get politics into judgeships. So that's a whole different story, but I just wanted to make that comment. But David, you were up front about helping us with bond reform, and I want you to tell these folks what you did in trying to get the legislature, me included, on the issue of bond reform and how we were able to stop some of the resistance that the earlier gentleman was worried about.
I remember right after you got elected, Rick Hubbard, myself, met with you, and I think a couple of sheriffs did as well, to talk about this issue. One of the problems we were having is with magistrates, essentially letting these guys out right after they committed a subsequent offense, and they've been let out numerous times. And they were already out on bond for another offense, and that was a problem. So when we got together with the General Assembly, over a couple of years, we got a real strong bond reform bill passed. The other thing it did was regulate these electronic monitoring companies. You know, a lot of these fly-by-night bond companies that weren't charging, they were all undercutting each other on the price. So you'd have these guys getting out, and the law said you had to charge 10%. So if it was a bond, the offender had to pay 10% of the bond to the bondsman for it to be a legitimate surety. You had a lot of bond companies that were not following the law. We had some elements of the law that address that. And SLED has a division now that regulates the bond companies to make sure that they're charging what they're supposed to under the law. The other thing is making sure the magistrates don't let out repeat offenders. So if someone is out on bond for a serious offense, they get picked back up on something else, the magistrate can't set bond on them the second time. Whereas before they were setting it a second time, a third time, and before us as prosecutors even knew that the person had been arrested, they were already out. So we weren't even notified. We couldn't even get in front of the court. So at least now that goes up to the circuit court. That offender has a lawyer at that point, which is their right under the Constitution. So they have a defense attorney, the prosecutor is there, all of the facts, all of that person's record is put on the record in front of the judge. And then at that point, the judge can't claim ignorance that he didn't know the person's prior record. What was happening a lot of times is the guy would pick up in jail, the magistrate judge that was setting the bond at the jail wasn't even getting their rap sheet. And that's another thing we put in the bond law. Require the magistrates to have the rap sheet, criminal history provided. So they know what they were out on bond for. A lot of times they're just setting bond like on this little formula sheet they have. Oh, okay, this is the crime, that's a $10,000 bond, and weren't even looking at the record. So there was a lot that we were able to fix through the bond reform bill. I was a big advocate of that. In op-ed pieces, and we really fought hard to get that bond reform bill passed through the General Assembly. And I appreciate Billy's advocacy on that in the Senate. So, thank you for that question. I forgot about it.
I was hearing what they were worried about. From Greenwood's point of view, we had a murderer, a person who had already was charged with attempted murder. Had went in front of a magistrate, and the magistrate just cut him loose. Again, almost for nothing. I mean, almost like get out of jail card free, like another $10,000 bond, but you went to the bonds person, got it for nothing, and then went out and killed somebody.
Then 3 weeks later, he did a drive-by shooting at the bar that they had kicked him out of in Greenwood.
Yeah.
And a girl that was just sitting in there having a drink with her friend got hit with a bullet between the eyes.
These things happen.
Yeah, so that the bond reform bill fixed that.
And then you think
So,
about it, and you're
right.
like, well, they probably, it happened so quick, that one judge don't talk, the right hand don't talk to the left hand,
Right.
and there they are in the middle, and they're out.
That's exactly right. Well, thankfully, I actually tried that case myself back in January, Billy in Greenwood, and convicted the guy. The judge gave him 45 years. I asked for life. The judge gave 45. He's never getting out. I mean, he's in his 30s. 45 years is day for day. So he'll be, if he makes it to 80, which that's a part of living in the Department of Corrections, I don't think he'll ever walk out. So it gets a de facto life sentence, but thankfully that guy will not be hurting anybody else. But because this happened before the bond reform bill was passed, that magistrate would not have been able to even set bond on him the morning that he was let out. So that's some things that we've been working on, and I agree 100%. We see these things on Fox News, and it's an embarrassment for our state. We really have to make sure we shore that stuff up so our families are safe. You know, one of the things that a couple more shout outs to the General Assembly. Bond reform we passed. The trafficking fentanyl bill was huge because fentanyl is killing everybody. And we didn't have a trafficking fentanyl statute. So we were left with inadequate penalties for a lot of these drug traffickers that were bringing in fentanyl across the border from Mexico, pressing it in these little blue pills. You talk to anybody in law enforcement in South Carolina, they'll tell you that was the biggest problem we had in narcotics. One of the issues was the border was basically a joke for 4 years. And so, you know, we had so much fentanyl in Greenwood, and we started to identify pockets of it, and we went after it. And so we ended up with 25-year sentences on a lot of these big drug traffickers, which was huge. A lot of the big dealers in Greenwood that were pressing fentanyl pills are now in prison. We were able to get the price of fentanyl that went from $2 a pill on the streets. You could get it from almost nothing. A pill that might cause an overdose. That same pill now is about $8 a pill. So we quadrupled the street price. A lot of that had to do with us hitting the problem. Some of it had to do with the last 9 months. We've had a border that's a little more secure too, thanks to President Trump and his administration. So thankfully we're able to attack those issues together now with the president, instead of as before, the states were left to their own devices and we had an administration that was asleep at the wheel for 4 years.
Literally.
And the Biden administration literally was asleep at the wheel.
You don't see the stories a lot anymore. It's working.
It's
all
working. It absolutely is working. It's just a matter of federal government doing its job.
Yeah.
And we're seeing the impact of that on the streets
Yeah.
now with criminal issues too. Now, has it eliminated fentanyl completely? No, we still see it, but it's not just flowing in like it was.
Yeah.
Now they're all the angry protesters.
Right. So that's another thing, you know, your state AGs have to stand with the president when he's coming in and enforcing the law. These blue states now are trying to prevent ICE
Yeah.
from doing their jobs. You know, those people need to be prosecuted for obstruction of justice.
Yeah.
They're blocking these officers from just trying to do their jobs. It's absurd.
Ridiculous.